Hey Snowtrax viewers on YouTube, Luke here, bringing you guys a walk around of a sled I'm pretty excited about. I'm pretty excited about this walk around and to bring it to you guys. The 2021 Skidoo Renegade X-RS with X suspension and their fancy new gauge package. It's also got the E-TEC skis, the new skis and adjusters. So this is next year's big news from Skidoo, other than the turbo, of course. And I wanted to give you guys a quick walk around / overview because I've spent some considerable time on this sled. This past couple weeks I actually spent a considerable amount of time up north in northern Ontario. I put on over 350 miles in 3 days on this sled while filming, and I feel that I have a very solid opinion of it now. An opinion that I think is solid enough that I can bring you guys and tell it to you guys and offer it to you guys in a way that I'm confident that my feelings are accurate. So that's why I wanted to do this now. First of all, let's go for a quick overview of what's different. Out back, rMotion X skid frame, quite a few changes there. New gauge package, fancy new digital gauge with their jog dial adjuster deal. RAS X front suspension and the Pilot TTX ski. So those are really the only changes between this and last year's Renegade X-RS. Do they equate to some major difference in how the sled works? Yes, they do. But I want to dive into that a little deeper because not all of it is what you think. So let's start out back. rMotion X. This skid frame is pretty much completely different from last year. Now, to look at it is pretty hard to tell because it does look very much the same. But the truth is, the front arm is longer. The middle shock is longer. There's a little bit more travel. The rails are different. The wheels are different. Pretty much everything is different. But the biggest change is this little piece right here. Now I'm going to call this a flip chip because I'm a mountain biker and that's what we call it in the mountain bike world. But that little silver piece there is kind of important to this skid frame. So in this position that it's in now, the upper position, you can see the bolt is biased to the upper side of that little silver adjuster. This is awkward to sit here like this. What that does is that keeps the nose of the sled down. So having the front arm mounted to the rails in a higher position keeps the nose of the sled down and causes it to weight transfer less or lift the skis less, essentially. If that's the kind of riding you want, if in the past you were riding G4 Skidoos and thought they wheelied too much, or that wasn't how you wanted them to handle, this is great. This is new. It definitely makes a difference. I'm not going to say it's a drastic difference, but it's definitely a difference, and I think it's great. But what I think is even greater is that if you flip that silver chip around and mount that arm in the lower position so that the bolt is biased to the bottom of the silver piece, it's something you can do with tools. You don't have to take the skid out. It's pretty easy to do. That causes this sled to transfer weight and not handle, but weight transfer like last year's version did. It'll pick up the skis more. It likes to wheelie and keep the front end light. I think this is a great move on Skidoo's part because this doesn't alienate last year's customer who really liked how their G4 transferred weight. But if you didn't want your sled last year to transfer as much weight or wished it didn't, then they got you covered too. So this was really smart on Skidoo's part, in my opinion. This skid also, somehow, even though it's got longer rails, longer front arm, longer shock, it's lighter by 5 pounds, they claim. The wheels apparently are one way they did it. Lighter wheels, they're also way cooler looking, but somehow they managed to save 5 pounds back there. Now the question that begs to be asked and answered is this: does that rear skid make a huge difference? Now, if you take out how it changes the weight transfer of the sled, which it definitely does, I'm going to say that no, it doesn't make a huge difference in how the sled rides. Now, rMotion was already the industry's best. Pro CC in a Polaris is close. In the Matrix chassis, it's even closer. I haven't had enough time to fiddle with Pro CC in the Matrix to really see if I can get it to work as good as an rMotion. The difference is minimal, almost negligible, but it is different. And the one area that I notice it in the most is anti-bottoming. When you run the rMotion X through its travel, the very last part of the travel, when you're just ready for that spine tingler and that gravity cavity you just hit at 80 miles an hour, this skid frame does resist bottoming just a little more and softens out that that harsh impact a little better than Pro CC does. Again, I haven't had a chance to fiddle with Pro CC as much as I'd like to, so that may change next winter when I've had more time, but for now, this is my observation. Obviously, this skid frame, you know, it's an XRS package, so you get tunnel adjusters, something I wouldn't put on my own sled if I had the choice. I don't use them pretty much ever on these sleds. I get it set up the way I like it, and then I leave it, but if you like it, there they are. Now let's move up front. So now we're talking about RAS X, and this is where the big difference in this sled comes from. This front end has longer arms, longer shocks. It actually provides a little bit more travel, not drastic, but a little bit. It's wider, slightly wider as well. And it, honestly, this front end changes the snowmobile completely. So we've complained, everyone knows here at Snowtrax, we've complained a lot about how Ski-Doos are twitchy and nervous, how you wouldn't want to ride them at 60 miles an hour on the trail with one hand. You always hold on with two. They're just not confidence inspiring. RAS X changes all that. This is a completely stable, predictable, confidence inspiring snowmobile to ride. One hand at 60 on the trail is not a problem. It doesn't dart. It might be one of the least darty snowmobiles I've ever ridden, ever. It doesn't wander on the trail into other people's tracks. It sticks to the ground with the chip in the back and the upper position. It really does keep the skis on the ground. Probably the flattest cornering sled I've ever ridden, but I do have to compare that to the Matrix, which I haven't been able to do directly. So next winter we're going to get into that and we'll find out, because the Matrix is a pretty darn flat cornering snowmobile as well. Which one corners flatter, I don't know, but here's what I do know. Ski-Doos in the past have always cornered pretty flat, but when you get into the corner and they get some bite on that outside ski, they would oftentimes lift the inside ski in a very unpredictable way, a way that wasn't confidence inspiring. It was one of the reasons that they weren't confidence inspiring to ride. And I say that, you know, I mean, when we talk about these things, we're talking about splitting hairs. You know, a Ski-Doo has always been a fantastic handling snowmobile, but in my job, I have to be super picky and super nitpicky. So when I say those things, I'm not saying Ski-Doos handled like crap. They just weren't as confidence inspiring as other sleds out there. This sled is, when it gets into a corner and it bites on the outside ski, it does not lift its inside ski ever, no matter what happens. No matter whether you hit an icy chunk, whether you carve harder, whether, you know, you hit the throttle, it never comes up on one ski. It is so flat. It's almost uncanny, and I'm very impressed with how Ski-Doo has changed this sled by changing the front end. I'm very pleased as well. Little interesting note, anecdotal note here that isn't going to do you any good, but it's interesting anyway. If you see this spindle, right in this area here, it's narrower than last year. You'd have to put them side by side to really notice the difference, but it's narrower. And the reason is because this sled is wider, they couldn't get two of them on a transport truck side by side for shipping. So they had to shave a little bit of material off each spindle so they could get two of them side by side in shipping. Just a little fun fact for you that's going to be useful at a dinner party, let's say. Now the TTX ski, this is their new adjustable ski. There isn't a single part on this ski that's the same as last year. Even the adjuster has been completely redesigned. I wouldn't put a TTX on my own sled. I don't think it's necessary. Some people love it, and good for you. If it's something that you're making use of and you really like, then by all means, this is a better version for sure. This works better than any other adjustable ski Ski-Doo's ever made. I prefer just a regular, you know, the Pilot TX ski is what they're going to have next year without the adjusters. But this is a good working unit. I have fiddled with it a bit. I did notice a difference lowering and raising the carbide slightly. So it's a good working ski, and it is an improvement over last year. So congratulations to Ski-Doo for that little fix. I love the ski hoop. The ski hoop looks super cool. You can see this sled is a prototype, or has prototype skis, because these hoops I'm pretty sure are 3D printed and painted yellow. But that's how early this sled is, and how lucky we are to be able to ride it this early. So now you've talked about the ski, we've talked about the front end, we've talked about the rear end. Let's talk about the other big feature that this sled has, the new gauge. So you can turn the gauge on without starting it by just quickly pushing the start button, and then it will boot up, which is what it's doing right now, and come on. Now, I don't know if you guys are seeing that flashing. It's just the way my camera's working. It's causing the screen to look like it's flashing. I'm sorry about that. But this gauge is Okay, this gauge is a huge improvement over previous Skidoo gauges. There's no question about that whatsoever. I like all the features. I like how it looks really good. Skidoo's old gauges, just to be blunt, were pretty disappointing. This gauge is not. With that said, this system here, I'm not a fan of. This jog dial, I'm going to be really honest with you guys. You can love or hate me for it, but I have to tell you the truth. The gauge itself looks nice. There's a few things about it I'll talk about that I'm not crazy about. But this system here is weird, and there's one particular reason. There's a number of reasons, but one particular reason why. You can see that as I scan out from here, that this whole unit is on an angle. So it's not square to the vehicle, and it's not square to the gauge. It's crooked. But in some of the settings on this gauge, you have to rock this side to side like this and forward and back. Because this knob isn't square to the gauge, while you're sitting on the sled, your instinct, as you look at the screen and are making adjustments, is to move the direction that you want to move on the screen, which is actually like this way, sort of on a 45-degree angle. And when you do that on the screen, it can cause all kinds of weird stuff to happen, like you're going up instead of sideways, or you're selecting things you didn't want to select. I'm not saying that's not something you can't figure out. I did figure it out, but I'm saying that when you're riding the sled or when you're stopped and you're just trying to make quick adjustments, especially with your gloves on, it's not as easy as it seems like it should be. It's you got to think about it. It's not intuitive the way I think it should be. It's just, I don't know. I'm going to say it's annoying. I just don't see why it had to be that difficult. This could have been redesigned and positioned square to the gauge. I would have liked that better. It would have also been easier to reach if it was maybe right here, kind of flat instead of over here on an angle. So that's a little bit, I don't know, it's just not my favorite. There are some gauge settings as well. Like this whole page here with settings, you got audio, your launch stat, trip. This took quite a while to get used to, how to even reset the trip meter, and then how to show the trip meter down here. And this side of the gauge, that's a trip meter. So I can actually change that from trip A to trip B, and I can also change it to the odometer. But learning how to do that was not intuitive. So I sincerely hope that Skidoo dealers are going to go through this with their customers before they deliver these sleds so people know how to work this gauge. But as I said, this screen here, you have phone, you have connect USB phone. There's a lot of music and phone functions over here that are only useful if you have a headset in your helmet. If you don't have a headset in your helmet, then those things are all essentially useless. I didn't connect my phone with a cable. I used Bluetooth. I don't know if I connected my phone with a cable, if I would have got like text updates on the screen or incoming call alerts or what. But having it connected through Bluetooth, there was really no purpose in doing that because none of the stuff worked unless I had a Bluetooth headset in my helmet, which I don't have. And I will next year so that I can use these gauges on Skidoos. So just keep that in mind. If you get this gauge, go buy a Scala Rider or a Senna or some other headset, throw it in your helmet because you want to make use of this. This gauge has got a lot of cool features. And that's something you're going to want to make use of. Now, another thing, quick, sort of I don't think it's the way it's going to be. This is sort of prototype programming, but the fuel gauge never showed full. It always showed 3/4. One last comment. If I push temperature, okay, this screen comes up, engine temp, and there's your battery voltage. You scroll through that. Now there's engine temperature again, but it's a different color. I don't know why it just went from black to yellow, but that's the screen I was seeing, is this yellow engine temperature readout. I don't know if you can even read it. In the daylight, it's impossible to read while you're riding. From back here, you can't even see that. If I push that, it comes up. I can't even see what that is, especially not when I'm riding down the trail going fast. So that needs to change. There's no option that I could find to put my engine temperature on the screen at all times so I could see it all the time. That's what I wanted. I wanted, when we were running in low snow conditions, to have my engine temperature up here somewhere, or change, something. You got your temp gauge here, but I wanted to know what the degrees were. I wanted to know exactly what it is. So it's not that it's not there on the screen. It is. It's just not the way I want it to be. And I feel with this much digital stuff going on, I should be able to have whatever I want. This should be able to be configurable. Sorry, it just shut off on me. There we go, kill button. With that said, I do like how it looks. It's a very pretty screen. It looks super pro on here. Under this flap here, you've got your little compartment. This is heated by the engine. It's got your USB cable in there, down there. You throw your phone in here. It's protected. It's charging. That's all cool. And there are features that, you know, having your phone plugged in you can use. I think there's some nav features and stuff like that that I didn't bother to try. So, gauge. There's some wins, there's some not so wins. I think this here is my biggest negative. Another anecdotal comment, I'm not sure Skidoo is expecting people to use the gauge and to adjust things while they're riding, other than using, you know, this button here does call, answer, and hang up, and then volume as well, so you can do that while you're riding with your thumb. But if they're anticipating you're going to use this while you're riding, that's very unrealistic, because making these micro adjustments, moving this thing side to side, front and back, pushing the center, that's not going to happen while you're ripping down the trail and you got your glove on and you're shaking along like this and you're trying to be precise with it and move it at a 45-degree angle to what you think it should be. That's not happening. Also, I don't really want to be taking my hand and putting it under the grip while I'm riding. If I need to hit the brake, I have to come back and go onto the handlebar. That I don't like. So I'm being really hard on this, but the reality is I just want you guys to understand all of the aspects of this gauge so you know what you're getting yourself into. It works good. The gauge is really pretty, as I said, has a lot of cool features, but understand that there are some things here that are limiting, and just be aware of it. And if those things aren't something you're worried about, if you don't plan to adjust your gauge while you're riding, this isn't an issue at all. This is actually a really good working, you know, system with the dial adjuster and then the selection in the middle to take you home, those types of things. It does function exactly how they say it does. There's just some limitations, so be aware of that. With all of that said, and I'm sorry that was so long, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about on this sled. I'm really impressed with it. I spent, as I said, 350 miles on it, plus I rode it previously to that for another maybe 150 miles. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. The sled handled, as I said, amazing. Rode as well as any rMotion equipped sled could. I will say that the front end does still get overworked in the bumps, especially when you're cornering. That's something that they haven't solved. The X-RS suspension, the shocks help with that. They're definitely the best setup you can get. But that is something that RAS X still suffers from. But the handling is just so far improved, you can't even say enough good things about it. So anyway, kudos to Skidoo. I hope you guys like this video. I realized I was talking fast. There's a lot to say. This is an 850. 850 works just as good as it always does. There's nothing to say there. It's a great sled, and anybody who's picking up one of these next year, if they've had a previous version of a G4, is going to be very pleasantly surprised. I'm looking forward to getting it out on the snow and putting 1,000 miles on it next year and really getting nitty-gritty, nitpicky about it the way we do with our sleds. You know, one thing you guys need to understand is that when we compare sleds, you know, we're paid to be super picky. That's why you watch this show. So when we complain about something like one skid frame rides better than the other, or, you know, this sled handles differently or not quite as good as another sled, we're just being really picky because that's what we have to do. That's what you guys want from us. Doesn't mean we don't like the sled. Doesn't mean we think the sled's crap or that it's garbage. When we pick one over the other, it doesn't mean what we're saying is that that other sled is no good. That's never the case. What we're saying is that if you take everything to the max and you break it down right to the bare bones, one has to be better than the other, and sometimes that's not the one you want it to be. So there you go. There's my readout on this sled. I hope you guys appreciated that and enjoyed it and learned something. Again, stay tuned for a full test ride next year where we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty numbers. You know, just how many inches more travel is there? How many inches wider is the front end? All those types of things that my brain just doesn't have any room for right now. So anyway, there you go. This is really long. Leave me some comments. Tell me if you guys liked it, if you think it's too long, if there's anything else that I missed that you wanted to hear. And yeah, winter's coming to an end here. I'm sad to see it go, but we're going to get into ATVs and side-by-sides here in no time and be ripping around in the dirt. It's going to be tough knowing this sled is sitting in the garage for the whole summer. I may even go sit on it and start it up once in a while just to get that winter feeling back. But it's been a great winter. I hope you guys had a great winter as well, and we'll see you next time.